Castlevania Bloodlines has lived in the shadows of Super Castlevania IV since its release in 1994. No matter where you turn, Castlevania IV is heralded as an all-time classic, while Castlevania Bloodlines is viewed as a step backwards. 8-way whipping, gone. Jumps cannot be altered mid-air. The soundtrack is inferior. The graphics are worse. This sentiment can be traced all the way back to magazine reviews from the era. In the March 94 issue of GamePro magazine, Slasher Quan wrote, "While the music and sounds are pretty good by Genesis standards, they are a definite downgrade from the orchestral, near CD quality of Castlevania IV's SNES audio. Bloodlines graphics look like they've risen from the 8-bit grave. Sparse colors and small sprites have all the quality of an NES game. Unfortunately, some of the best power-ups from the previous games are now missing, such as the shot multiplier, the pocket watch, and the dagger. One wonders how Konami could make games so perfect in heart, body, and soul as Castlevanias 1 through 4, and then drive a stake through the Genesis version." As I read through this classic review and watch modern takes on the title, I can't help but wonder, what game is everyone else playing? Castlevania Bloodlines takes place hundreds of years after the events of the Nintendo titles. In the year 1917, a countess is looking to revive Count Dracula. It is up to 2 vampire hunters to travel across Europe to stop her as she enlists the help of different powers of darkness. Per usual, the story is simple, but does give a purpose to some of the changes. The protagonists are only briefly in Transylvania, and Dracula's castle is in disrepair. Visually, time has passed, and there is no Dracula in the castle's final tower. In fact, it is crumbling apart, paying homage to the series' roots, but letting the franchise move forward. And forward, Bloodlines goes, through Greece, Italy, Germany, France, and finally, England. Now, previous titles have done a wonderful job with level theming, even while limiting themselves to the castle grounds. But Castlevania Bloodlines certainly has a unique feel, helping it stand out against its contemporaries. While I don't want this review to be a response to any particular magazine, journalist, or content creator, the old GamePro seems to lay out a path to follow as we dive deeper into Castlevania Bloodlines. First, the graphics are great. I don't think anyone would confuse Bloodlines for an NES game. Enemy sprites are massive, backgrounds are detailed, the animation throughout is top-notch, and the team also seemed to use every hardware trick known to Genesis developers at the time. Stage 2-1 features a nifty reflection effect, with the reflection adjusting as the water level rises and lowers. Water is actually a major theme in much of the stage, with palette swapping occurring midway through the screen, giving the impression the ancient runes are being flooded. Or maybe the runes aren't flooding, but it is a tide, as it recedes a few scenes later. While perhaps not as artistically appealing as true transparency effects, I do enjoy how the effect is used as an actual hazard. Next are some rotation effects. These are not true sprite rotations, though the hardware is capable of it, but the shifting sprites make it appear the statue head is rotating as it gets knocked down. A similar technique is used in the Leaning Tower of Pisa, with it swaying back and forth as the protagonist races up it. The Genesis Shadow Highlight mode is also used a few times, giving an appearance of light beaming through the palace. Most impressive might be stage 6-2. The screen is torn into 4, with the backgrounds and sprites moving through each tear in a visually striking way. Thanks to the shadow mode, it also appears the protagonist is moving forward and backwards through each layer, a unique visual effect and something I haven't personally experienced on 16-bit hardware before. Of course, there's more to visuals than graphical effects. First, I think John Morris and Eric Lecard look terrific. While Simon Belmont looked alright, I found the sprite a bit busy, with the level of detail the developers were trying to convey exceeding the resolution available, making him look pixelated at times. John Morris, on the other hand, seems to be drawn and painted with the resolution limitations in mind. His boots, pants, vest, and shirt are clearly defined and distinct. Same goes for Eric. His medieval skirt, cape, and flowing locks are drawn with restraint, and I find the sprites more visually appealing than those of Konami's earlier efforts. I also like how each character has an idle animation. It is a small detail for sure, but a great little touch to keep the characters looking alive, even when at a standstill. With all that said though, I can't for the life of me figure out what went wrong with the stair climbing animation. It almost feels like half the frames are missing, and the character is sort of jittering up the stairs. It looks far worse than the original title, and I don't understand why. Next are the environments themselves. I didn't find Castlevania IV to be special in the visuals department. Outside of some neat effects, the graphics looked oversaturated to me, lacking contrast, and oftentimes the foreground and background blended into each other. Sometimes the colors chosen were garish, not matching the gloomy mood the game presents. Castlevania Bloodlines offers a vastly different art style by comparison. Where Castlevania IV feels like a detailed fantasy book, Bloodlines has a more graphic novel aesthetic. Colors are more distinct, details are chunky, and the screen is filled with far more contrast. While personal preferences can certainly play a large part in which game one finds more visually appealing, I do feel Bloodlines has a few advantages from a gameplay standpoint. Mainly, I always felt like my eyes were drawn to where the artists intended. This is accomplished through contrast, with platforms always contrasting with the background. A second touch I enjoyed was the static backgrounds. While I'm used to backgrounds scrolling up and down at different speeds to simulate depth, sometimes Bloodlines bucks the trend and the backgrounds don't move at all. This allows for more detail, like large buildings or a ship. Not everything is good though. Stage 4-5 looks weak. The background has just 2 animation steps, making it choppy, and when the entire background is this choppy image matching the colors in the foreground, it all sort of blends together. Stage 2-5 is a rather boring dark night reflecting on water. Barely. However, one area I feel Castlevania Bloodlines offers a clear step over its predecessor is with enemy sprites. Generally speaking, enemies in Bloodlines are bigger and more detailed. Bone pillars, bone dragons, ghosts, skeletons, and mermen are all larger and more detailed on Sega's hardware. So while I think one could argue Bloodlines is a downgrade from a visual standpoint, thanks to fewer colors and tame backgrounds, I think this is an overly simplistic argument. The art styles are different, and in many ways, Bloodline works much better as a video game thanks to better contrast. And if one looks beyond the backgrounds and color counts and starts looking at the sprite work, I think the pendulum begins swinging right back. Next is the soundtrack. Again, I'm going to pick on GamePro and say declaring something as CD quality is a poor way to explain the Super Nintendo's sample-based hardware. Stating something as CD quality speaks little to the artistry of the music, such as the compositions and instrument selection. And I'm not even sure it is technically accurate to claim FM synthesized music isn't CD quality for that matter. Still, there are some low-quality sound effects found in Castlevania Bloodlines, such as the door opening and closing in the first stage, and the piercing squeal of the gargoyle is unpleasant to say the least. Lastly, the final form of the final boss encounter is a highlight reel of Genesis twang. Moving along to the positives, and we have the opening track. Reincarnated Soul is a terrific way to begin John and Eric's quest. The opening is almost chorus-like in its structure, with a catchy melody playing before the first verse kicks in. From here, there is a mix of old and new. The synthesized piano notes sound classic, yet their crunchiness gives them an 80s vibe. Meanwhile, a fast drum beat lingers in the background, panning left and right, perfectly balancing out the higher-pitched notes. The entire verse slowly builds towards the chorus, getting more intense and higher pitched before the chorus crashes in, offering a fantastic conclusion to what the composer built. The piece fits the stage perfectly, pumping the player up for the adventure about to unfold. Discolored Wall is much different in tone. It is somber, mysterious, and haunting. Rather than being upbeat and energetic, it offers a sense of dread. Notes linger on. Chord progression wanders, sometimes lowering, other times increasing, and sometimes it is scattered, giving an uneasy feeling as the listener is never quite sure what direction the track is going to go. And then the chorus thunders in, offering a dramatic contrast to the verse. Rather than sounding sparse and barren, the instrument layering is dense and full. When I listen, I can clearly comprehend what the composer was going for, an uneasy feeling as the player precariously makes their way up the tower. Iron Blue Intention is another classic Castlevania piece. It occurs around the halfway point and captures the feeling expertly. I hear triumph as if the protagonists have come a long way, but not victory, as the protagonists still have a long way to go. The chorus is powerful and energetic, almost like the heroes are getting a second wind on their quest to take down the Countess. If this was a film, one could easily see a montage of the heroes taking down foes on their way to the final act of the three-act adventure. The instrument selection plays to the strengths of the Genesis hardware, with brass instruments leading the way, with subtle drum crashes and synthesized notes layered in, and finally a few gentle strings offering a full orchestral sound. Perhaps I am just too used to the Genesis sound hardware, and its shortcomings are lost on my ears. But when I play Castlevania Bloodlines, I don't hear a downgrade in fidelity. I hear a full soundtrack filled with lovely synthesized instruments, some natural, some synthetic, blended together beautifully in one of the best soundtracks available on the hardware. The compositions are terrific, capturing the mood and atmosphere of the specific stage it represents. And as I play or listen, it is easy to identify what the artist wanted me to hear and feel. A downgrade? Bloodlines is not. Finally, it is probably time to talk about the elephant in the room. Neither character features 8-directional whipping. John's whip can only be swung at an upward angle while jumping, and only forwards when standing. Eric is the opposite, and he is able to stab straight up or diagonally upward while standing. However, while jumping, he is limited to forward only. Both characters can stab downwards while jumping, but I never found a use case. The characters actually offer a different gameplay experience. Eric's ability to strike upwards from a standstill makes many enemy encounters easier, especially when an enemy or boss is directly above. The spear can also be swung faster, which makes certain enemies like bone pillars less threatening. The classic vampire killer is not without its own advantages though. It can deal more damage, making some fights like this one against Medusa go quicker. A better visual representation can be found in this fight against a mage. When John connects a hit, 2 bars of enemy health are removed. When Eric hits, it alternates between 1 and 2, suggesting the whip may be as much as 50% more powerful. While I would still say Eric and a spear may be a better option for beginners, John is not without his merits. On my recorded runs, I only died one more time with John compared to Eric. Not quite evenly balanced, but closer than I expected. In any case, the 8-directional whipping is most definitely gone, but I am unconvinced that this is a bad thing. The only thing missing is the shield effect, dangling, and whatever one would call this. But there is no instances in Castlevania Bloodlines designed around these mechanics. Instead, enemy placement and behavior more closely mirror the NES games. And in this case, the reduced agility of the whip is never a problem. A forward strike is almost always adequate, and both characters offer an upward strike when needed. In fact, the reduced agility has another side effect. The sub-weapons are again helpful. Bloodlines does streamline things though. The sub-weapon lineup is reduced to the boomerang, holy water, and finally the axe. As the Game Pro review noted, the stopwatch and dagger are gone, but the reduced item set works just fine. What Castlevania Bloodlines does do is evolve the formula. Rather than shot multipliers, each sub-weapon now has a secondary function. The secondary attacks generally cover a larger area of the screen, have additional damage capabilities, and overall increase the utility of each sub-weapon. There isn't a bad one anymore, and all will be useful during boss fights. The best part is, using the secondary attack costs 4 gems rather than 1. This offers a bit of depth and strategy to their use, as one now has to manage resources. Eliminated are some of the broken aspects from previous games. A triple-shot holy water in Castlevania I was game-breaking, freezing bosses in place with an efficient heart cost. The triple shot boomerang was broken in Castlevania IV, shredding bosses for as few as 6 hearts. These situations do not exist in Castlevania Bloodlines. Increased utility now comes at the expense of increased resources. Bloodlines doesn't stop here though. Both the spear and the whip can be upgraded a 3rd time, resulting in the flame whip and the flame spear. Melee damage output is increased, and the player's sub-weapon will be replaced with a special attack. For Eric, there's a screen-filling rush of energy, inflicting damage on virtually everything. For John, there is an energy-seeking projectile, homing in on everything on the screen, perhaps a callback to Sypha from Castlevania III. While these may seem broken at first glance, the power-up is lost if even a single hit of damage is taken. Additionally, the attack cost for special sub-weapons is a whopping 8 gems, further reducing abuse. I prefer this to the shot multipliers. A player has to play skillfully to keep the special sub-weapons versus the shot multipliers, which are only lost upon death. There is a real reward for playing flawlessly, and I think this does make Bloodlines feel like the most balanced game in the series thus far. That isn't to say certain bosses cannot be cheesed, but a player has to work for it now. Lastly, each character has a few unique moves. John can use the Vampire Killer to swing off any ceiling. This is required to pass 2 obstacles in the game, once in stage 3-4 and a second time in stage 5-4. If I'm honest, this power isn't useful. It can be used to damage enemies like the first boss, but it feels so clumsy to use I avoided it unless the game required it. Perhaps the speedrunning community offers clues to its full potential, but for normal players, it is somehow less graceful than the grapple beam. Eric, on the other hand, has 2 gimmicks. First is this twirling maneuver, which I never found a use for, although it showed potential on this sub-boss in 5-7. And second, he has a high jump. The high jump is only required for the 2 alternate paths where Eric cannot swing, but there are a few shortcuts here and there. The entire gear tower can be cheesed hard as well. However, while all 3 of these maneuvers look cool, their full potential never seems fully realized. So, to bring this full circle, I never found myself missing the 8-directional whip. While I feel an easy hot take may be to conclude it is gone and therefore Bloodlines is a step backwards, I don't find this to be true in practice. The enemies presented never require more agility than offered by the heroes, so nothing is lost. Additionally, I feel like the reduced melee attacks allow other aspects of the game to be greatly expanded. I use the sub-weapons all the time with each character. When I came across a new sub-weapon, I thought about how I might use it on upcoming obstacles and made sub-weapon decisions accordingly. I found the resource management adds an extra layer of depth to the gameplay, which is most definitely a good thing. Speaking of depth, another little touch I loved was the actual melee attack itself. If one holds the attack button, both the whip and the spear will do an extra hit of damage versus quickly mashing the button. This meant in some instances I would hold the attack for an extra hit of damage, and other times I would mash the attack button when it wasn't needed. With that, it is time to move past the GamePro review and discuss what I find to be the biggest change with Bloodlines when compared to Castlevania IV, the bosses. Castlevania IV's bosses were fairly easy until the end of the game. Simple forward whip strikes were all one needed to defeat the vast majority of them. I don't find this bad per se, they did their job and acted like a nice visual spectacle to end each stage. Bosses don't have to be a test of skill and can serve other purposes. Bloodlines takes a completely different approach. Usually, the designers wanted to test the player's reactions, dexterity, and pattern recognition. These start fairly easy, with the wolf and armor battler being mostly damage sponges. The mage ups the ante, requiring the player to jump and strike while water races up the screen, putting a time limit on the encounter. This exact technique is later repeated with Elizabeth Bartley. From here are a number of armored baddies. These generally require the player to identify a pattern and a weak spot to make sure the damage exchange is in the player's favor. There is a bit of trial and error with these though, as the player has no real way to identify how far the boss jumps thanks to their immense size and quick speed. This meant on my first attempt I was annihilated while I learned the patterns. The golem again wants the player to jump and strike. If one has the axe subweapon, they can inflict damage on the weak point without having to break out the middle layers first. This head-hitting pattern is repeated on the fight against Dracula. Moving along, Castlevania Bloodlines starts cranking up the difficulty. The gargoyle fight includes a multitude of patterns to dodge, such as a whipping tail, projectile attack, and then some direct assaults. What makes the fight even trickier is the fact it is on top of a small tower, meaning the player has limited places to hide, and the tower is spinning, meaning the player is being moved around. It is a strong fight. My early attempts were laughable, but the game offers the axe sub-weapon on the screen before, which greatly aids in the fight, and while dexterity is necessary for success, the inputs are far less stringent than they initially appear. Most importantly, despite being just the third major boss in the game, the designers are expecting much more from the player than just whipping forward as quickly as possible. Thankfully, thanks to clever backgrounds and sprites, there is still spectacle. The fight succeeds at being a test of player skill, as well as offering splashy visuals to celebrate the end of the stage. This idea of pattern recognition and learning is repeated throughout the remainder of the game. Frankenstein's monster has 3 distinct telegraphed attacks, each requiring a different action from the player to avoid the onslaught. The gear steamer has even more offensive attacks, some requiring the player to jump high, others duck low, and others to stand in the middle of the screen. The weak point also moves, sometimes needing the player to jump and strike, and other times ducking, meaning the player is constantly observing and reacting to what is presented. But I should probably take a break here and point out my biggest pet peeve with Castlevania Bloodlines. The game offers just 2 continues, rather than unlimited continues. The game compensates this with an easier difficulty option which eliminates some mid-boss encounters, and one can increase the life counter from 3 to 5 in the options menu, but these don't address the underlying contradiction. The boss encounters are fun to learn. One will have to fail many times to learn the proper strategies. The bosses hit fast and the bosses hit hard, and death is inevitable. I can't imagine an average skilled player winning on reaction alone. There is trial and error involved, and I am fine with trial and error. If a game wants to kick my ass until I figure out the right way to do it, that's cool. But don't start me back at the title screen when I fail. If failure is not the player's fault, the punishment should not be a game over. This is something the classic games understood. Certain fights were unfair, and when the player fails, one started the level over, allowing one to try different sub-weapons and offered a quick path back to the boss to try again. This makes sense, and I have no doubt contributes to the respective title's popularity back in the day through to the present. Castlevania Bloodlines reverts to an arcade mentality, cheating the player without the benefit of pumping more quarters into the machine to continue. I find this trial and error boss style does not mesh with the limited continues, and I have no doubt the frustration factor led many to put the controller down and go back to Castlevania IV. It is a baffling design decision, and there is no excuse for it. Again, Castlevania 1986. Anyway, another interesting gameplay decision is the lack of mid-air control. The jump arc is again static. Thankfully, Bloodlines has no tricky platforms at all. There isn't a single moving platform to be found, a first for the series. I should note the gears turn and there are some conveyor belts, but neither obstacles need precision jumping. In fact, of all the games I've covered so far, Castlevania Bloodlines might be the least platform focused of the bunch. This is most definitely an action game focused on combat, and this is most evident with the bosses. There are a ton of them, so picking up where I left off is another armored knight. Not every fight in Bloodlines is brutal. This one is easy. As long as the player ducks and stays close, the hero cannot be hit. This technique is of course copied from Stage 2, and I like how concepts are repeated and reiterated as the adventure progresses forward. Thankfully, this phase is surprisingly tough. The player needs to dodge or destroy projectiles and then strike the column during the brief vulnerability phases. If one just wails on the column, they'll likely take more damage than they dish out. Instead, careful timing and limiting aggression is the name of the game. This concept of limiting aggression and playing strategically continues with Princess of Moss. The moth is almost always within striking distance of an upward attack, but as she litters the screen with pollen and eggs, the player is tasked with prioritizing offense and defense to keep the damage exchange in their favor. This balance of offense and defense is terrific, and despite Bloodlines being a simple game, the enemy patterns and skills needed for victory are always changing and evolving, keeping the experience fresh and engaging to the end. Fittingly, Castlevania Bloodlines ends with a boss rush, which feels like what the game was building up to. Prior to battling death, the player needs to pick a card and then fight truncated versions of previous bosses. In addition to them being weaker, the color palettes are changed, helping them feel different. The color changes and quicker pacing helps them feel more like obstacles or a roadblock to the final baddies, and less like what it could have been, padding. In any case, after defeating them, the battle with death finally ensues. And he's a pushover. Player hits do a ton of damage and he ends up going down remarkably easy with little strategy. And this theme sort of follows through to the end of the game. Dracula is easy, Dracula's second form is easy, and the third form, in addition to sounding awful, is easy. Yeah, this has kind of been a trend with the Castlevania series. The final encounter with Dracula is a joke in Castlevania II. Castlevania III is aided by the fact the player can fully load up with a triple shot into cross. Castlevania IV offers a similar fate, with death being a much more difficult fight than that of the Count. Castlevania Bloodlines is no exception. One can load up with a full gem count, flaming whip or spear, and the special sub-weapon before the encounter begins. This means Dracula goes down quick, the second form can be cheesed with the special weapon, and the third form can be taken down quickly with normal attacks and the secondary sub-weapon attacks depending on the situation. In some respects, it is anticlimactic, with bosses like the Gear Steamer and Gargoyle offering a far more tense experience. Alright, with the graphics, sound, controls, and gameplay out of the way, it is time to reach a conclusion, and I'll cut right to the chase. Castlevania Bloodlines is better than Castlevania IV. The graphics quality is similar. If one finds more color visually appealing, then Castlevania IV gets the edge. If one finds their tastes prefer more variance in luminosity and contrast, then Bloodlines will look superior. Both games take advantage of their respective platforms, and both games will come to a screeching halt when there are too many sprites on the screen. The audio is where things start to separate for me. Castlevania IV is a decent sounding game, though some tracks are awkward, with strange instrument selections, compositions that don't lead anywhere, and awkward transitions from verse to chorus, sounding jarring and inconsistent. Bloodlines, on the other hand, is amazing. The synthesized instruments sound rich and full. The style is excellent, with a mix of classical motifs and 80s synth, which are blended perfectly, and the compositions are fantastic, always matching the on-screen visuals and action taking place. Next, the tweaks to the weapon system are awesome. The reduced attack directions don't detract from the gameplay, and both protagonists are capable combatants against the evil lurking across Europe. The lack of multi-shots and the addition of secondary sub-weapon attacks costing more gems greatly balances out the gameplay, helping the adventure feel more strategic and more engaging with few lulls. Lastly, the bosses are just better. Bloodlines features the best action in the series thus far, bar none. The boss fights are engaging, with each requiring a different mix of skills to defeat, forcing players to explore the full capabilities of the main weapons and sub-weapons. However, they also highlight the game's biggest problem, which is limited continues. While this may be a bold take for sure, I can only report on what I find. While Castlevania IV will likely always remain the preferred 16-bit title, I do find Bloodlines is greatly underappreciated and often overlooked. Perhaps it shouldn't have taken Konami 25 years to finally re-release the game. The graphics are great, especially the sprite work, the soundtrack is among the best on the hardware, and the gameplay is by far the most balanced I've experienced in the series thus far. Castlevania IV is super for sure, but Bloodlines is, well, more super.